Hi, everybody. Welcome to the Patty Brennan Show. Whether you have $20 or $20 million, this show is for those of you who want to protect, grow, and use your assets to live your very best lives. Joining me today is Laura Clancy. Laura is a life coach. And as we think about the way that I introduce the show to live your very best lives, to protect, grow, and use your assets, Laura Clancy has the protect part down cold. And the topic today that we're going to be focusing on is disaster preparedness, mitigation, developing resilience when those curveballs are thrown your way. In my opinion, there is nobody better than Laura Clancy when it comes to those issues. Laura, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much, Patty. It's so good to be here. See you in person.
Yeah, absolutely. So I'm just really curious because you really don't have a background per se in risk management. You're not an attorney. How in the world did you ever become so knowledgeable about disaster planning and risk mitigation? Tell us your story.
Yeah, my story actually begins in 2006 when my house flooded unexpectedly. And at that point, it was about $60,000 to $80,000 in damage. We were insured, but flood insurance is almost impossible to collect on. And I thought that was the end of it. But as it turns out, 13 years later, that was just the beginning of it.
Oh, dear.
So I'm actually just an ordinary person, a lay person who's experienced a lot of disasters.
Wow. And there is nothing like real life experience for all of us to become an expert. And what is cool about your story is that you're now sharing your insights, the things that you've learned to help other people make sure that the problems, the issues, just the ridiculous amount of red tape that you went through, that other people don't go through that themselves.
That's right. I believe that we should expect the best and plan for the unexpected because extraordinary things do happen to ordinary people. And it's not really fun and sexy to think about planning for a disaster. It's tedious. But when you get on the other side of that planning, you can have peace of mind and a lot more energy because your mind is relieved of what you need to do.
It's really interesting. I often find myself, Laura, going back to my early days in my previous life as an ICU nurse. And boy, talk about crisis. At any moment of any time, a patient can crash, meaning their heart stops, they go into VTAC, VFib, they stop breathing, something can happen. And what appeals to me about what you do is that that's kind of like what we need to do and do for our clients in terms of, okay, everything's going along hunky-dory. Okay, that's fine. But let's do some stress testing. What if it isn't going well? Where are you most vulnerable? And how can we reduce or eliminate those risks? Now, the one thing I'm going to tell you right up front is when it comes to property and casualty, I do not consider myself an expert. We don't have a property casualty expert here in the firm. So what would be your advice? First, I'd love to hear more about your story. What happened? What did you do? What was it like when you were going through it?
Well, in 2019, to continue the flood story, in 2019, we had a big microburst above our house. And this time I was home. So I could see the rain coming down. And I decided to take action. My worst enemy that day was not the rain. It was actually my own thoughts of, is everything fine? Is everything okay? But I took action anyway. I mean, I joke about how I slammed down my coffee after I looked out the front window and saw water coming up over my son's tires. And I slammed down my coffee, grabbed the keys, shoved my feet in someone's shoes, and I drove his car all the way up the hill. And by the time I came back, the water was already over the sidewalk. So I moved 2 more cars up in the driveway, and then I screamed to my son, there's an emergency. And we moved all the most expensive stuff from our basement upstairs. And within, 15, 20 minutes, that water was at my front door. So I literally laid down and I pushed that water back as hard as I could. So I took action even though my idea was everything's fine. I'm going to look ridiculous. But I did it anyway, and I saved us another That first flood was 60. This was only 10 or 12.
Wow.
So I took action, and that was a defining moment for me. I realized in an emergency, like you at the ICU, I'm good in a pinch. I didn't want to be good in a pinch, but I knew I built confidence that day. I built that confidence muscle up.
You know, it's interesting. You can't rely on the ability to think when it's happening. You have to kind of go and rely on that muscle memory. You go over and over and over. You practice it. You know, that's what I learned in nursing school. You know, that's what you learn, on the regular floor. And that's what you did on that day. You just really just said, okay, I don't care what it looks like. I'm still going to do it. Worst comes to worst, we drive the cars back down the hill. Nothing lost, right?
Exactly.
I thought it was so interesting. It was scary hearing what it must have been like for you grabbing towels with your son and literally rolling them up and putting them in the cracks of the door. Tell us more about that.
Yes, I was laying down, and I had another emergency going as the water flowed into the basement. So I changed places. We traded positions, and Liam said, "Is this even making a difference?" Because of course that water was still going underneath.
Right. I have a question.
Oh yeah.
Time out.
Uh-huh.
How old was Liam at the time?
Probably 2019. He was 19.
Okay, wow.
Yeah,
All right.
he was a millennial baby.
There we go. Okay. And what an experience it is for a 19-year-old.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. It's really interesting because he and I have been through quite a few interesting things like that. Like one time we saw a man, almost like you in ICU, fall off. He was skateboarding down a hill, and he went flying, and he hit his head. So I had to pick him up and take him to the hospital with his son, and Liam was with me. So we seem to be together in these.
Wow.
I don't know. Maybe we shouldn't hang out together.
Wow. Gosh. As a mother of a son who had a traumatic brain injury from a skateboard accident,
Oh,
please
my.
let me look at you in the eyes and say thank you.
Yeah,
You saved that person's life.
I may have. And who is ever born thinking, wow, one day I'm going to be natural disaster girl,
Right.
or, I'm going to help people in emergencies. But I think I believe we have to keep our body, minds, and spirit strong, foundationally strong, so that if and when disaster comes, we are ready for it. Because it's that triage position you're talking about. I don't want to think about every worst case scenario. I call it WCS. I've worst case scenario in my life because I have a lot of anxiety or used to.
Yeah.
But I think if you are strong in body, mind, and spirit, you can do anything. You can do anything in an emergency, and you're a good person to pick on in an emergency.
What a great way of putting it. Body, mind, and spirit. Because again, to your point, you don't have the time to think. You've just got to act. Then you get to think. And then, I think the way that you frame it is just so powerful. You say react, respond, and release.
Mm-hmm. Yep. So, and you think about it just in general life, right?
Yeah.
Like if you're in a conversation and it's a heated conversation with someone, you're reacting. Usually people aren't listening. They're talking to react, right? Or to have a response. But I think that if you can get to the point where you know what you're going to do and you do it, you can get on the other side and release it right away. You don't have to carry that with you and make it your burden.
Yeah, absolutely. It's interesting. There's a saying that talks about expectations. It's a different way of kind of thinking through things. Expectations are just premeditated resentments.
Yeah, that's really
It's good to have goals. I think it's really important to have goals. But when we put our expectations on another human being, and if they don't deliver, not a good thing for
No.
either party.
That's right.
We believe in each other, right? That's one thing. We work towards something that might be important. And again, this is more about personal growth, helping people to grow, not necessarily disasters. But by doing so, we help those people to avoid those disasters, or maybe just help them to realize all the wonderful things in their lives. And that's really what you do as a life coach.
Right. And I think that's what you do as a wealth management coach. I think I know what you're doing is you're helping people. Not everybody's on a growth path. They're just not. It's unfortunate, but they're not. But you're helping the people that are. You're giving them really valid information about how to manage their wealth. And then you're interviewing people and teaching them how they can grow too in these other areas, because everybody's specialized. So we have to learn from specialists so we can kind of become um, like, I
The
don't know.
connector, maybe.
Yeah, that's
You
right.
know, it's so true because I'm the first one to tell you there's a lot of things that I don't know, but I'm curious, right? I'm just a curious person. I want to understand you as a human being. I want to understand what you aspire to, what you worry about. And then I want to talk to the Laura Clancy's of the world because for example, the property casualty, flood insurance. Okay, I know for the most part, it's terrible. Is there anything that we can do to advise our clients? What can we do to make sure that everybody's aware if that thing does happen? Here's what you need to do, or here's how to be a little bit more resilient financially and ready emotionally.
That's a really good question. So I'll start with the flood, and then I'll talk about my
Yeah.
next disaster because I think then I have better advice for that. So for flood insurance, my understanding is that the people that are selling you the insurance are well intended, but they don't really understand what they're selling you. So a lot of times you're buying something that you think you have, but it's very specific. Like I would get into the minutia of your contract. This is what I heard from a claims adjuster about flood insurance. If the houses on either side of you don't flood, you're not covered. I mean, it's that specific. Now, I don't know if
Wow.
that's really true,
Hmm.
but that is something that happened to us. And in 2006, that flood, the insurance company that we had, and I think this is typical, it was a local disaster area. We had so much water in the DC area. So they sent CAT teams, so catastrophe teams.
Okay.
So somebody came in who was not an experienced adjuster for that particular insurance company. Some days they would have on the hat of one insurance company and the other. And I didn't feel like he really cared. Like he said, your
Mm,
car is fine. My car had been underwater. My car was not fine. I wasn't going to drive it.
yeah.
And they just blew off our house. So
Mm.
for flood insurance, I don't have as good of advice as I do for our next disaster, which we haven't even talked about.
Okay. Fascinating, fascinating. And it is that fine print, or maybe, when you go through it, you say, oh man, this is just not what I thought it was. It's interesting because we have kind of that same similar role. Like, I'll tell you, I'll give it to you real. We have people come into this office all the time. To me, my job is also to figure out what's out there so that we're aware of it because if it's something that would be good for our clients, I want to make sure that they're aware of it. So we have a lot of people who come in, and usually it is the following: rant, rant, rant. Aren't we great? Recommend us to your clients. And I'm like, well, I don't know about that. And so I have 30 full-time people, and we dig and we dig and we dig before it gets anywhere. And that's kind of it. I go to these conventions, and I'm one of these nerds that goes to all of the booths.
Hmm.
It's wild. I am surprised, kind of disappointed in my industry that advisors don't go to the booths because that's where I learn. And my spiel is always the following: I don't recommend your service or your product currently. Tell me why I should. I'm not going to promise you anything, but let's have a conversation. And then I go to the next person and they just watch what I did with that person. It's kind of funny, but I appreciate what you're saying there because there's so much to these things and the nuances. And let's face it, these companies are in to make money, and they're not making money if they're paying a lot out in claims.
That's right. That is correct. And I think research. Maybe one of the things I thought about is get together with friends. Like
Mm,
again, this isn't fun,
mm.
but maybe if you work together cuz we're so used to working alone and it's lonely and it's confusing. Work with people and dig just like you do. I think that's so cool, Patty, because you're so curious. Like you said
Yeah.
earlier, like always be curious,
Yeah.
always be curious. And that's what sets you apart from so many others. You care so much about getting the right person on your team to help your clients. It's just phenomenal.
It's so interesting. You just reminded me years ago, probably maybe 10, 12 years ago, there was a long-term care product, a policy that covers for long-term care. And when it first came out, honest to goodness, it was really like, it felt like it was too good to be true, really too good to be true. So I actually went to one of my clients who's like really, I hate to use the four-letter word, but it begins with an A and ends with an L. Fill in the other two words, right? And she's very detail-oriented. So I said, pretend her name is Susan. I said, Susan, how about we do this? I'm going to read this contract and peel it apart. What do you say we do that together? And let's see if this thing is really what I'm being told it is. Because I just want to advocate, and I'll go back to them and really push the envelope. Long story short, it was everything that we thought it was. She actually got the policy. The policy was around for about 3 months, and the company took it off the market because it was too good to be true. And they weren't going to make any money. But she's got it.
Wow.
Isn't that cool?
That
She's
is cool.
grandfathered also.
That's very cool.
So that's kind of
There
what
you go.
it is
Planning,
all about.
right? Planning.
Right. And to your point, peel it apart, take the time to understand.
Yep.
I guess from my perspective, I'm gonna be the client here because, let's face it. Who do you know who to trust, right? Because especially in that area, when you get a policy, for example, I might have gotten a homeowner's policy 10 years ago, and every few years I get these endorsements, these things that they send in the mail that say, oh, by the way, we've added something to your policy, more like taking it away. And what am I going to do, right? Like I don't have time to go to the bathroom, much less research my own insurance. So it's very interesting how that can occur and what it might mean in terms of people not necessarily having what they thought they had.
That's a tough one. I'm lucky because my husband was in insurance and he was actually in claims. He was in auto claims for many years.
Nice.
So he tends to be a little skeptical. He digs deep. I'm kind of the flighty one. I don't dig as deep, but I've learned to, right? And I will sit down with him until I understand. It takes a lot for me to understand because they use confusing words.
Right.
And it's like buying a mattress. You can't compare and contrast, or tires. You just can't do it.
Yeah.
And so maybe a neighbor that you know, a lawyer that you know, it is so worth paying the money up front because, again, disaster can happen. And it happened to us again, as you know. May the 4th be with you in 2022. And we were so lucky that we had good insurance.
So tell us more about that one.
May 4th, 2022. I'll tell you the whole story.
Crazy.
I was on stage in La Jolla. I'm a speaker and I'm growing my business. And my story is about the flood of 2019. And I was on stage with my one true sentence, which is Mother Nature picked on the wrong water sign that day. And about 20 minutes later, my phone rings and I'm in a theater and I'm at an event and it's my husband. He never calls when I'm at an event. So I go out into the hall, it's California. So I went out into this entryway that's outside. It's absolutely gorgeous. And my phone had blown up. I had text everywhere. Laura, are you in the house? There are fire engines everywhere. And then my husband called and he said, there's been a fire. And I argued with him. I said, we're not fire people.
We're flood people. Right. There you go.
Took a long time. Wow. So fortunately, Patti, none of us were home. None of us were home. It's not lost on me that I was talking about the flood when it burned down. I believe in a higher power, so I know that it was answering my prayers. But at the time, you're in shock. Yeah. You go into shock. And again, you've got to have somebody reasonable. That would be something I would tell your audience. If you find yourself in this position, it's that triage. You're probably not prepared for it. Go call your most reasonable person, the reasonable friend that you have, somebody that you trust to help you through that process.
So let me get this right. Did your house actually burn down?
Yes.
Wow.
The structure is still there. The brick is still there, but we lost everything. Unfortunately, our cat was in the basement and didn't survive. That was really hard. Yeah. That was really hard. My son was at school and my husband was busy teaching, so nobody was home.
Wow.
And that's unusual for us.
Wow. So this was just last year. So what have you learned from that experience?
That I can really speak on. So there are different types, there are different parts to your homeowner's insurance. There's loss of use, which is when you have to be outside of the house and they pay for you to stay outside of your house. So people should check that, make sure they have good coverage on that, because in order to get back to where you were, if it's something as big as ours, it's going to take 2 years.
Oh,
So
boy.
be in an apartment for 2 years, make sure
Wow.
that the insurance will cover that. Then there's structure. For us, we had replacement cost. We had built-in inflation. We had all these riders. So they were going to dig out the interior of our house and put it back together, and then put it back together as best they could to what we had. And we had we had a policy for replacement costs plus all this extra. Like, now that we're rebuilding, we needed code updates and things
Oh,
like that. So
sure. Good
that we
point.
had
Hmm.
in our policy. And then we also had contents. And contents is usually a percent
Hmm.
of your structure. So that's what we were left with. And we had a little bit of problems with our contents. We're on the other side of that now. And that goes back to who you can trust. So that's what we had in our insurance policy. And what we decided to do is sell the land or the structure and purchase another house. I think we're done with that house. I think that house was kicking
Yeah,
us
that's
out.
kind of, yeah. All those disasters. I think, that higher power of yours
think
is
so.
telling you something there,
I
Laura.
agree.
You're done. You're out of there. Wow. So here's a question. What did you learn? What was it about the contents in particular?
This gets back to trust.
Okay.
We had to hire an attorney because the man that I was in California, and Jim, my husband, said stay in California. And he said, you're not going to like what I say next. So he shipped me to Utah because he and my youngest, Liam, who helped me
Yeah.
with the flood, had to get back on their feet and find a place to stay.
Right.
And so I went to Utah, and the people that took care of our content, so it was word of mouth. It was this person recommended this person recommended this person.
When you say took care, what does that mean?
You mean
taking care?
what did
Getting it out of the house?
Yes. So there are people, like after a flood, or they take your
Yep. Okay.
things and they clean it.
I got it.
So the man that represented this company came in and met with Jim, Liam, and the insurance adjuster.
Mm-hmm.
And this insurance was good, by the way.
Yeah.
Very happy with them. And went through the house, and he said to all of them, it was all verbal.
Mm.
I don't know if I would recommend bringing a recording of something like this. It all worked out for us. I can give you the update on that. But basically, they went through the house, and the man said, everything in the basement is gone. The fire started in the basement.
Okay.
Next level, he said, it was too hot. Everything on this level is gone. We might be able to save some of the things it's a split level, living room
Okay.
level and the upstairs. But it depends. And what he said is, we'll take your textiles, your clothes, and we'll try that. We'll test that. And so Jim said to me while I was in Utah, because I wanted to see it, right?
Yeah, I'll
like you
bet
kind of want to
did.
say it
Yeah,
goodbye.
Sure.
I mean, I'm all hippy dippy, but there is a little practical. I am a trained accountant, kind of like you're an ICU nurse.
Yeah. Yeah.
There is a practical side to me.
Sure.
So they came in and they brought a big crew, and they took everything.
Mm.
They didn't do what they said. They took everything. So I never got to see it. They took the papers, they took the plastic, they took everything on those levels. They packed it up, and they said 10% was savable, 90% they'd bring a dumpster. They did the opposite and charged accordingly.
Wow.
So, and it was getting worse and worse and worse. They were charging for everything.
Can I make a suggestion? Maybe if I'm going to kind of read between the lines here, Laura, is a takeaway while your house is still standing, go take a video of everything in your home.
Bravo. Yes, everybody should do that before,
Yeah.
I think. That's a before.
Sure.
And definitely have a fireproof safe.
Okay.
That saved us. We had, like our passports and things like that
Yeah.
were in there.
Okay.
You should always have it in the basement, but ours was in the attic and it survived.
Yeah, I have one. I don't close it though, so what good is that going to do? Shoemaker
I
here.
know. Life is hard. I
It
mean,
is.
you have to take certain things seriously, but life is also full of levity. Life is full of fun.
Yes.
Like as I told you earlier, the leading edge of comedy is the trailing edge of tragedy. And let's try to shrink that time, right? Like shrink that.
Okay, say that again slower.
Okay.
That's amazing, guys. Listen to what Laura is about to say.
The leading edge of comedy is the trailing edge of tragedy. And if you can shrink that time between the two, you've won at the game of life.
Powerful. So powerful. Boy, that really gives me some pause. Thank you for that. So when you think about the fire and the tragedy and the 90-10 breakdown and the amount of money that they were just raking over the coals and taking from you, at what point did you say, Uncle, this is not right? And what did you do?
Well, as you know, my husband did not want to fight.
Yes, I do.
And Patty, I was tired. I'm tired. I'd been through about 4 years of just, and those are just some of the highlights of some of the things we went through.
Sure.
But the thing that made me mad wasn't that they were taking advantage of us, but that they would take advantage of someone who's at the bottom of the birdcage, at the bottom of their life. The hardest thing that most people go through, most people don't go through this.
Right.
But it wasn't my first rodeo, and I had fight in me. I did not want them to do that. So I hired a lawyer. I told my husband he didn't have to get involved. He did, though, thank God, because he had all the history.
Sure.
And I'm happy to say we picked up our 30 boxes last Friday, a
Yeah,
week ago.
baby.
They reduced what they were charging us, and we walked away. And now they have all of our stuff, and they need to destroy it, and it's done. The fire is behind us. Everything now, we purchased a new house. Everything is toward our new future. We're rewriting our new story, or we're writing our new identity. We get a choice, right? Like, this isn't an unhappy ending. Nobody wants to read that book. We're creating our own happy ending, one chapter at a time.
And what is so cool is that not only are you creating a happy ending, but you are printing books and books and books and books so that other people can learn from your experience so that they don't have to go through what you've gone through. And we're all that much better off, and we're much more wiser as a result of what you've done. So let's kind of pull this together. I think it's so cool because what I found is, we talked about worst case scenarios and I call them stress testing, et cetera, but you've got a checklist, which is very intriguing. And by the way, I haven't seen this checklist. So girlfriend, you got to send me this checklist.
Yeah, I'll send you the checklist.
That's really important because sometimes people don't even know the questions to ask. So what is it about the checklist? What makes it different?
I think there's pre-planning, the planning. Sit down, look at your, look at every document you have. It's just like you do with, I don't know if you guys do estate planning, but estate planning,
you bet.
It's all of that. Look at what you have. Look at what you have to protect, right? Your personal umbrella. Look at all of your insurance policies, all of them, your house. That's usually your biggest asset. So I would say sit down, look at that, and really go through it. And then also maybe look and see the reputation of the companies. Like there's Yelp, there's Google review. Because my understanding from the lawyer that we hired is most people are underinsured. So make sure you're insured enough.
I agree.
Better to pay pennies right now and then
you betcha.
Yeah, and survive later or thrive later. So there's that. I mean, going through the minutia and the boring with someone that you trust.
So if I hear you right, it's the underlying insurance company that matters more than actually the agent representing that company. Is that what we should think about? Or?
I would say so. I really think so because everybody, they're nice. Salespeople are nice and they really think they're selling a good product.
But it's their product.
But it may not be correct. And so the lawyer, because I said, well, we had this good insurance company, and he said, it's not the insurance company. It depends. And I thought, gosh, you can't even rely on anyone, any of the major ones or minor ones. So I would look and see or talk, word of mouth, go find out people who've had disasters. I don't know. That's kind of brave if you knock on someone's door like, hey, heard you had a disaster. How did that go? But it would be one way to maybe you could compile locally and help others locally.
It makes me think, boy, wouldn't it be cool, which are dangerous words to Key Financial, by the way, because when I say wouldn't it be cool, everybody's like, oh, God, here she goes again. But really, wouldn't it be cool if there could be an advocacy group that would literally walk people through an insurance policy, a standard insurance policy, and say, in English, this is what this means, and here's how it will be applied. that idea of the flood insurance, if the two people, on either side haven't been flooded, you're not covered. Well, from the insurance company's perspective, I can see them getting away with that. I can really see that happening. But that's the pits, right? So, okay, let's understand, go into it knowing that that's going to be the case or could be the case. No offense, I hope my neighbors get flooded, right? Because that would mean we're all covered. But just in case they're not, again, those expectations are premeditated resentments. If we expect in any kind of a flood, it's covered, well, maybe not.
Right.
And that's
Yep.
and that's where your topic is so powerful, because what you talk about so much is resilience.
That's basically what I do. I help people pre-resilience. I call it pre-resilience. I've talked to other high-level resilience coaches, and they say it's resilience. I think it's getting ready, your body, mind, and spirit, because if disaster happens, you are at your peak. If you're gonna, and I think your audience is always trying to get to their peak. They're into personal growth,
Sure.
and they're listening to you because they're curious too. And then I would say too, if and when something happens, call that friend. Call that one friend that can take you through. You are not in your right mind. You are not in your right mind, and you can be taken advantage of.
Interesting.
No
Good
matter
tip.
how clear you think you are, you probably aren't. And then after, if you wind up in a problem like we were with the people who took the contents, hire a lawyer and look around for a good one. We found a
Yeah.
really good one.
Yeah. Yeah. You need somebody who's going to advocate and be really, really just be there and not give up. Because what is so important is that what you're doing is not only helping your situation, Laura, it's helping so many other people, to your point earlier, that are going to be completely taken advantage of. And they're just going to say, well, I guess that's it then.
Yeah.
I guess I'm going to pay these ridiculous bills and I'm not going to get any of my stuff back. I guess that's the way this stuff works.
Yeah, you can't. You have to be your own advocate. So, and then that's the response. And at the end of that, when you've done that, when you've put it all on the table, you need to applaud yourself. Give yourself an A+ for getting through something very difficult and release it. Release it.
I love that part of it. React, respond, release. That's Laura Clancy in a nutshell. Wow. I can't thank you enough for being with us today. Thank you so much for your wisdom, your insights, and for sharing your story. It's hard. It must be hard for you to have to tell that story over and over again, because it's just like, I don't know, PTSD, you got to relive it, and you got to, we all have these pictures in our mind and things of that nature, and you do it with so much grace. What I so appreciate about you is that you have a greater purpose in mind.
Well, eventually there will be a musical.
There you go.
That's what I want to do. That's my dream, is to make my musical, Muffin Toppled, the musical. It'll be a Tony Award-winning musical.
Wow.
And that's my big dream and purpose, and it keeps me driving. It keeps me moving forward.
Okay, Muffin Tupple, because I know that is the name of your company. Tell us what that means.
Well, I started as a personal trainer because between reunions, I would gain weight and lose weight. And in 2008, I decided I never wanted to lose that 30 pounds again. So I became a personal trainer. And I joked about starting a company called Muffin Toppled, that muffin around your middle. I've got it too, because right now I've not been in the best self-care mode, but we're back to that soon. You can put it on hold and then come back to it.
And don't judge it either.
Yeah. And so the philosophy is laugh, cry, lose weight. Like becoming weightless in such a heavy world. It's gone much further than just body and getting skinny or getting strong. It's about becoming weightless and just living your best life. So it's Muffin Toppled. The musical are going to be musings from my heart. And hopefully I'll get that off and running this fall.
You are a wonder to me. So much creativity, brilliance, wisdom. Laura, thank you so much for joining us today. This was so fascinating. If you have any questions, if you want to get a copy of that checklist that Laura Clancy has put together, go to our website at www.keyfinancialinc.com. It's going to have all of Laura's stuff on it. She's phenomenal. please feel free to go to the website. We'll send it out to you. And I guess the most important thing is that I want to say to all of you is, chances are when you clicked on this topic, most of us don't want to talk about the bad things that can happen in our lives. And yet you still listened all the way through. And I want to thank you for that, because this is how we all get better. And that's what this podcast is all about. Again, as I've said, it's not an area of expertise that I have, but I sure know somebody who understands and can help. So thank you for joining us today. I hope you have a fantastic day. Take care.